All right. So, a man's heart is stonier. Yes. This is Stephen King's Pet Sematary. Stephen King's Pet Sematary. It's misspelled, but nevertheless, that means cemetery. Because the cemetery was created by kids. Now, the ground is sour. So we know, even from the mime Marcel Marceau, known as Beep, because he did a certain mime where he took the heart. It was actually created by one of Marcel Marceau's students. If you know anything about Beep, or Bip, however you want to call him. And a student did a mime where he takes a man's heart and begins to eat the man's heart. But when he tries to eat the man's heart, he cannot. Because the man's heart is like a rock, far too hard to bite into. And that's what Stephen King is talking about. The man's heart is hard, like a rock. This is mentioned throughout the story. I have not read the book Pet Sematary, but I've gazed at it. I've looked at the samples. The books that I've read is The Stand. I have read Misery. All the Richard Bachman. I've read different seasons. The Stand was the hardest, but this is probably something I should read. But regardless, that's what he's talking about. Now, the kids have returned. Well, the daughter and the wife will return here, and the son, Gage. And she is asking about Church, Winston Churchill, the cat, the gray cat. So I've mentioned Edmund as Church. He's a doctor. So in the Bible, the Christian is to do two things: to heal and to baptize. That was God's command before he ascended into heaven, to heal and to baptize. And one of the jobs of the doctor is to heal. So he becomes kind of fascinated with the pet cemetery, because beyond the barrier is a mountain that his neighbor, Eddie Munster, his name's not Eddie Munster, but his neighbor takes him to show an ancient burial ground created by the Micmac Indian. And his relative, not his, but the neighbor, who's Eddie Munster, had a relative or friend that was half Micmac, and that told him about the burial. A neighbor told him about it. And way in the past, because his dog Spot, not his, but Eddie Munster's dog, the one that talks like this, don't go down there. No, that's the pet cemetery. I don't want to go down there. No. That guy, the older one, played Eddie Munster in the Munsters. His friend knew about the pet cemetery, but he knew about the burial, the ancient burial ground, which was constructed by the Micmac Indian, where the ground is sour, where you don't go to bury the dead. They buried Spot, not him, but Spot the dog, which was Eddie Munster's dog. Now, Eddie Munster's not in the story. I'm just being colloquial, okay? We know who Eddie Munster is. He's in this movie. Well, he goes when he was a boy and buries his dog Spot. And Spot returns and he's ferocious and mean, like he's rabid, because he's living his life the second time by force because of how the Micmac were. So he comes back and he's growling and mean and yapping. Well, the doctor, when he hears the story, asks him, has anyone ever buried a person there? And he knocks over the beer. Eddie Munster's character does. We'll get into the whole... Look, I can look on when I get my second iPhone, I can just sit there and boom and punch it in and get his name. I can get the address that he lived at. I can find out when he was born. I can sit there and talk for days and days and days about the character that Eddie Munster played and the real actor's name. We can go on for hours on end and talk about him, but it's not about him. I'm just trying to tell a story from another person that told a story. And he gets nervous and knocks over his beer and says, no, why would anyone ever, So he tells them that no one would do that no one would bury a person in the Micmac ancient burial ground, right? So Grim Life Collective did a whole series on the vlogs of Pet Sematary. So they went to Maine. I used to live in Maine. I lived in Maine for 17 months. And they did a vlog going from Bar Harbor to Arcadia Park, all these different locations in Maine where all of this movie was filmed, which was mostly in Maine. Even the trail that goes down to the original Pet Sematary was actually filmed in Maine. And this road where the guy's driving and listening to Sheena is a punk rocker, and he's driving, he's a truck driver, and he hits Gage and kills his son, and he begins to scream at God. Now later, before all of this, all that road is real. It's really amazing. The lady, not the lady, but I'm sorry, the young daughter. She would be a lady now. She'd be a grown woman now. But the young daughter cries out at the father, or cries out upset that her cat, Church, may be killed on that busy road. And if God wanted his own cat, then let God get his own cat, right? She's upset knowing that God would take her cat, because that's why the Pet Sematary was created, so that they could remember and so their pets could speak, right? A place where the dead speak, right? Well, there's a place where the dead walk, and that's where you get to later on, and these dead animals and dead people come back to revisit. It's very Roman, okay, especially the wife, who is seen as this very beautiful, statuesque character, if you see who plays the wife here. And she comes back from the dead too. And eventually Gage comes back to the dead to haunt him, to realize that you only die once. You don't live again, but you do live again in this story. When I was in Maine, I went to a non-evangelical church. They had beautiful music. These people came from Africa and got up in front of the church and began to talk about how they only want to live once. Now, whether they're quoting Pet Sematary, I don't know. But they did not want to have to live again. They wanted to die, and they wanted to go to heaven. And that was it. They did not want to live a second life. So they talk about a second death. So he is quoting possible scripture, meaning he may be referring to the Bible in some way. Whether he did it on purpose or not, I do not know. I've never interviewed Stephen King. But there is known as a second death. And that is referred to in the Bible. You can have one death, or you can have what is known as a second death, which is basically hell. So Stephen King is not only talking about the first death, but he's talking about the second death and coming back from hell, coming back from death, and being ravaged, and being rabid, and being sour and stony, and knowing that the heart cannot be bit into and is hard, right? He's talking about how man ultimately is evil, and coming back and being reborn back into a life again from death, from hell, makes you far more evil and zombie-like, where you want to kill, whatever it is that caused you to live again. Now we refer to the Ramones in their song, I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery. I don't want to live my life again, like they don't want to come back. So when you die, and you move on and you go to heaven. That's kind of the lesson, all right? Cut and good to go. We're going to watch more. All right. We have Judd Crandall, Rachel Creed, Ellie Creed, and Cage Creed. They're all sitting having a picnic. There is a kite flying by the doctor, Lewis Creed. Soon, Gage Creed will follow the kite, but they will not pay attention to him. He will go out into the road, and a truck driver listening to Sheena is a Punk Rocker by the Ramones will run over the boy, killing him, and the doctor will scream to God, and everything changes. It's what's called the inciting incident. It's a climactic point that changes the entire story, and it goes into a different direction, all surrounded by the death of the son. He was also in Car 54, by the way. The character actor. He also played Eddie Munster. And his name is? Judd Crandall was played by Fred Gwynne. That's Fred Gwynne from Car 54. He was also Eddie Munster. Fred Gwynne. I guess I win. All right, so we know the characters. That's Cage, Creed. The little girl's Ellie Creed. And the wife. The wife right there. Full-grown woman, born in probably 56, 57 or something like that. She's born in 1957. Well, the actress was. It's Rachel Creed. Okay? And Lewis Creed is the guy with the kite. Can't see him right now. But that kite will kill that little boy. So the actor here named Del Midkiff. He moved to New York, became a waiter. He was in like Love Potion. He also played a role called Elvis and Me or something of that nature. And then he landed Pet Sematary, which made him famous. He lives in Los Angeles and Maryland. This movie allowed him to move to Los Angeles and become a citizen of Los Angeles. But he also goes to Chance, Maryland to hang out too as well. That's him playing Lewis Creed with his character son, well, the character that's playing his son, known as Gage Creed. Who's not really his son, but it's just an actor, a young boy playing his son. That boy right now is a man now. But regardless, this is this last little moment that he has with his son before his son runs off into the road and gets killed by a sloppy, fat, probably secretly an alcoholic truck driver. Kills him to the music of the Ramones, which Stephen King orchestrated all of this, and it's a horrible scene. And next I'll cut to where he's screaming. So he's playing a doctor named Lewis Creed. Next he'll be screaming that he lost his son. All right, so at this moment, Victor Pascal, I believe is his name, comes to visit the doctor, Lewis Creed, in a rural cemetery where his son is buried, where Lewis Creed's son is buried, and explains to him that, the ground is sour and not to try to resurrect his son. And so he's going to take his son's body to the Micmac burial ground and then bury the son and then, resurrect him in a way. But the thing is like, the idea behind it is that maybe death is better, in this aspect, because they come back like zombies and they come back evil. And that's the idea that Stephen King is making, I guess. And I guess in a way, he is kind of making a point, a theological point about trusting in the death and the resurrection of the spirit, which is different than the flesh. The flesh being evil and wanting to return to the flesh rather than go forth into the spirit and be delivered. I think that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. Pet Sematary does have a theological point.